Okay, this is our learning experience project. Our case study will take place in a youth summer outdoor volleyball camp that teaches movement and accuracy volleyball skills. There are also tournaments taking place during the program too. Our learner is new to volleyball and hoping to gain a new hobby. This task can take place in an open or closed environment. An example of the closed environment would be the one-on-one or group instructions with instructors teaching skills. This environment is very predictable and focuses on the learners enhancing their skills. An example of the open environment would be the learner participating in a volleyball match or in the tournament. There's a lot more at stake during a game, like winning or losing points, as well as putting more pressure on the learner. The instructor will focus on the individual or learner's overhand serve, improving the overall performance. The instructor will focus on the hand placement on the ball, eye coordination, and accuracy of the serve. The goal is to let the learner acquire a new skill and improve enough to play in games with friends at camp and other situations, as well as mastering the skill enough to complete it confidently and without demonstration. Classification of the skill. The overhand volleyball serve can be classified using several skill classification systems. First, the serve is a discrete skill because it has a clear beginning, which is the toss, and a clear ending, which is the follow through after ball contact. Second, the skill does not require body transportation. The learner stays in one spot while performing the movement. Third, the skill does not require object manipulation because the learner must physically control the volleyball by tossing it in the air, then hitting it. These actions require precise manipulation of the object to execute the serve correctly. The overhand serve also incorporates both open and closed loop control processes. A closed loop system uses sensory feedback during the movement to make ongoing adjustments. This is most evident in the early stages of the serve. The player can adjust their stance, modify the height or position of the toss, and use visual feedback to ensure the ball is aligned correctly before swinging. If the toss is too low or drifts sideways, the player can decide to catch it and restart, demonstrating reliance on feedback. An open loop system, on the other hand, relies on pre-planned motor programs with little or no opportunity for feedback-based corrections once the movement has begun. In the volleyball serve, once arm swing is initiated after the toss, the movement happens too quickly for conscious adjustments. The server must rely on a well-learned and practiced motor program to generate the correct force, timing, and contact point. This part of the serve is executed by the player's predictions rather than adjustments based on feedback. Finally, although the skill itself is a closed skill, since the learner decides the timing and the movement is self-paced, the end goal is that the learner performs the serve in an open environment, such as a volleyball match. In games, factors like crowd noise, score, and opposing team formations create unpredictability that the player must adapt to. Together, these classifications help us understand how the serve is structured and what constraints affect the learner. Learner's description. Our learner is currently in the cognitive stage of learning. We chose this stage because the learner has never performed an overhand volleyball serve before and is trying to understand what the skill would look like and feel like. We observed several performance indicators that support this classification. One being is choppy and uncoordinated movement patterns. The learner's movements lack synchronization, showing that they are still figuring out how to sequence the skill. The second was inconsistent performance with frequent errors. Each attempt looked different from the last, with variations in toss height, timing, and arm swing. This inconsistency is common in the cognitive stage, as learners rely heavily on trial and error. The third one was low self-confidence and hesitation. The learner second guesses their action and does not show confidence in their technique, which is expected when acquiring a new and unfamiliar skill. These indicators make it clear that our learner needs structured guidance, demonstrations, and clear verbal instructions.
In our case study, the use of verbal instructions and demonstrations is important as the learner is currently in the cognitive stage of learning. Providing verbal cues and demonstrations during this phase will help make the learner understand the overall goal of the skill and guide their attention to the key critical elements needed for a successful performance. Since the learner is in the cognitive stage, they likely won't be able to detect relevant information from the irrelevant information. Using a hands-on approach, the instructor should first decide the most important information then organize it, and lastly, communicate effectively to the learner. It's important to ensure that you have the learner's undivided attention. Novice learners have limited capacity to process multiple sources of information at one time. Therefore, having distractions will hinder the learner's ability to detect new information and understand crucial performance cues. Ensuring that you have the learner's full attention helps lead to optimal learning, reduces errors, and promotes strong skill foundation. By doing so, the instructor creates an environment that supports accurate and proper skill development. We will implement demonstration in our learning experience by first addressing what should be demonstrated. When demonstrating a skill, you should first focus on the pattern of coordination, such as the technique required to perform the desired action. For an example, during the preparation phase, the instructor shows how the feet are positioned, how weight is shifted, and how the tossing arm and swinging arm coordinate to maintain balance and consistency. Another key strategy is to demonstrate the entire skill and to do so in real time. In the beginning, the primary goal of the initial demonstration is to provide the learner with a general understanding of the movement's requirements. Showing the full skill allows the learner to see not only what the movement should look like, but also the intended outcome and how various components of the movement are connected to one another. Next, we should focus on who should demonstrate. Both an expert and learning model can be effective, but they serve different purposes. In our case study, I believe a combination of the two may provide the strongest learning experience. With the expert model, a learner can become motivated to continue to practice to achieve the level of proficiency. Additionally, the learner from this model can see the correct movement pattern. On the other hand, the learning model, the instructor can provide both correct and incorrect aspects. Unlike the expert model, this promotes an active engagement of the observer and encourages movement exploration. Next, we can focus on how the demonstration should be organized. We can first show the full movement without verbal instructions, allowing learners to observe the overall pattern. Then it can be shown again in a more sequence way to break the skill down into parts. Demonstrations should be presented from angles that maximize visibility, and the instructor should avoid overloading the learner with information. Next, we should focus on when the demonstration occurs. The demonstration should occur before learners attempt the skill, giving them a clear model to reference. Next, we can focus on how often the demonstration occurs. Demonstration should be provided as needed, particularly when introducing new phases of the skill or when learners require a visual reminder. Instead, demonstrations should be spaced out and used strategically to reinforce learning. The amount of information, such as hand placement, foot placement, and arm placement, and eye coordination, are all crucial. Verbal instructions will be kept brief and limited to 1 to 2 key points at a time to avoid overloading working memory. Instructions will focus only on the essential elements needed for successful performance. Next, we will focus on an external focus of attention to promote more automatic controlled processes, which enhances learning and performance. Lastly, we will use verbal cues such as toss, step, hit, which will allow the learner to remind themselves of the sequence of events to hit the ball. Take a step forward, throw the ball up, and hit the ball. Verbal cues will be short, memorable, and action-oriented, helping learners remember key movement elements without overwhelming them. Cues will be repeated consistently during practice to reinforce motor patterns.
Okay. For our evidence-based practice, we reviewed the article, The Impact of an External Compared to an Internal Focus of Attention on Simple and Complex Motor Skills. Acquisition in novice female volleyball players. The purpose of the study was to examine how different types of verbal cues, specifically internal versus external focus, affect the development and performance of motor skills in novice volleyball players. The study included 57 participants who were randomly assigned to one of 3 groups: external focus group, an internal focus group, and a control group. Training lasted 6 weeks with 2 60-minute sessions each week. Participants practice both a simple skill, volleyball passing, and more complex skill in overhand tennis serve. The researchers collected pre-test, post-test, and transfer tests to measure both movement quality and accuracy. The external focus group showed better improvement form and overall performance for a simple passing task compared to the internal focus and control groups. For the more complex serving tasks, external focus improved accuracy and performance outcomes, even though it did not significantly change movement form. These findings support the use of external focus verbal instructions when working with novice volleyball players. External focus helps enhance accuracy and performance, especially when the movement technique is still developing. This reinforces our use of short, externally oriented cues in our instructional plan to improve learning and performance during the overhand serve. The correction of errors. For teaching an overhand volleyball serve, I will implement both the knowledge of results and knowledge of performance. Knowledge of results is information about the success of an action with respect to the goal. For example, in our case study, some outcomes of an overhand serve could be the ball landed inbounds or your serve did not clear the net. This knowledge of results informs the learner to refine the skill and motivate adjustments when needed, leading to improvement in accuracy. This type of augmented feedback in the earlier stages of learning will allow the learner to see if their action achieved the desired outcome. The next type of augmented feedback, knowledge of performance, is information about the movement pattern and correcting those errors. Some examples of this in our case study could be you need to toss the ball slightly higher before hitting and extend your arm fully to put more power on the ball during the swing. This information on performance will help learners refine technique and correct errors in the movement. Improving technique and fine-tuning specific components of the serve are very significant as the skill is complex and requires high levels of precision. We can also use video replay, verbal feedback, and demonstration to foster the learner's understanding of the skill and movement pattern. Video replay is useful when teaching a new skill because it allows the learner to see their own movement and mentally adjust. This type of feedback helps enhance their body-mind connection and gives them a mental image of the movement so they can correct it themselves. Oftentimes, verbal instruction and cues can be confusing or overwhelming to new learners, so pairing the verbal with visual will allow them to adjust to both their own internal and external feedback.
For augmented feedback, correction should be made after the movement has been completed. Before explaining the movement, the instructor should demonstrate the movement beforehand so the learner can see what it should look like. After it is demonstrated, the instructor should describe the motion in easy-to-follow steps with clear instructions. It should then be performed a few times, allowing them to get an idea of what the movement is and allowing the instructor to record the learner and have a few different repetitions to play back. When the video is then shown to the learner, they should be able to watch it themselves and understand what is right and wrong based on initial instructor feedback. The instructor can then explain what went right or wrong in the movement, so the learner has two forms of feedback to go off of. When the verbal feedback is given, it should be short and mostly cues as to not confuse the learner. When they perform the next set of movements, the learner should have a mental idea of what it should look like in their head, allowing them to mentally adjust. So for our videos, our presentation would be a bit too long, so we have the videos linked. The main goal of this study for our evidence-based practice was to examine the relationship between motor learning and frequency of augmented feedback. The authors looked at whether a certain frequency of feedback is more beneficial than others. The population for the study consisted of 60 young adults between the ages of 18 and 35 years old. They were randomly placed into 4 groups, either the control group, 100% visual feedback group, 67% visual feedback, or 33% visual feedback. Participants were tasked with performing 3 trials of a postural control task involving balance. Visual augmented feedback was given to the participants based on which feedback frequency group they were in. Data was then collected from a pre-test, post-test, and a retention test. The main result of the study is that the 67 visual feedback group demonstrated the most improvement in performance at the post-test and retention test. This supported the guidance hypothesis, which states that too much feedback may decrease learning and a dependency on feedback. These findings can be useful in our plan of practice. We will provide the learner with feedback on most but not all serves. This lower frequency will benefit the learner so they will not rely on intrinsic feedback to perform better. We will also keep the feedback concise to avoid putting too much feedback, therefore deterring their performance. And these are our resources.